Okay, so welcome to our Camano Wildlife Habitat program, our February program. We have these the third Wednesday of the month to kind of let people know about either critters in the area or landscaping to help with wildlife habitat. So our goal on Camano is to create an island in harmony with nature, 1 yard at a time. And right now we have 1,057 backyard wildlife habitats that are certified by the National Wildlife Federation. And we do this because of it's a way to help with all the habitat loss on the island. So in 2002, this became our action plan. So rather than sob when we saw the logging trucks rolling off the island, we decided that we could do things in our backyards, even though we couldn't necessarily stop things that the regulations allow. So you can see the difference in what's gone on in 1984 to 2020. So the goal of the project is if people are doing things in their backyards, then we can restore some corridors and connect the different parks and preserves on the island. And so the National Wildlife Federation, they have been doing their backyard wildlife project since 1973, but they also have a community wildlife habitat project. So Camano is a community wildlife habitat, and our project is sponsored by Friends of Camano Island Parks. So to think about yards, it's to think about it with landscaping for wildlife in mind. So when I first moved to the island in November of 1994, you can see that the our house is down in the water and we have a stairs to go down, and the top was all grass at the top, and it was pretty sterile. We had a tree and grass, and so through the years we have changed that. So it's all wildlife habitat now. And we've done that with the idea of doing it in pieces rather than all at once. So in 1994, November, or just, I can't read the date at the moment. Anyway, that's when we moved there. And then in 2007, we had pretty much gotten the left-hand side, which is the south side, landscaped for wildlife, and it has the layers of ground cover, shrubs, and trees. And then currently the right side is filled in as well. So in our habitat, we were thinking about, having plenty of ground cover that's not grass, because grass is kind of sterile, or very sterile. And so we have wild strawberries, kinnikinnick, salal, and various things just growing down there. And then we have our bushes and our trees and various levels of understory and taller and not so tall trees. And so now it's quite an oasis. And on the other side of us, the neighbors to the south and to the north, they have grass. So on a hot sunny day, they are in sweltering heat, and I'm in my little oasis. And we also think about when we're landscaping for the wildlife is areas. So if you know about Russell Link's book, Landscaping for Wildlife, he's got this idea of areas. He's wildlife biologist for the Department of Fish and Wildlife in Washington. And so this would be like our area 2. So area 1 is close to the house where you're around a lot. Area 2 is kind of where you have pathways and you go through. And then area 3s are where you don't go very often. So we have a long strip of land. So our area 2, this goes between our house and the garage. And then our area 3 is closer to the road where there's tall trees. And we have our drain field, and we have various places for the layering system as well, even though our drain field is there. So the whole idea is to think about ways to provide food, water, shelter, and places to raise young, which that layering does. Water is the most difficult, perhaps, because it's not just there naturally. Like if we leave our yards kind of wild, like the island's natural setting is, then that's pretty much provided. But the water can be as simple as putting down a pot, like the bottom of a flower pot, and then putting some rocks in so it's not steep edges, and add the water, and you have a water source. Besides thinking about food, water, shelter, and places to raise young, it's also thinking about responsible gardening. And so that can be like reducing lawn, growing natives, and in March, our speaker will talk about plants for pollinators, Brenda Cunningham. Water conservation is a big thing on the island because we have a single source aquifer. The pesticide use, reducing that or eliminating, is important not only for the critters but also for us because it all goes down into our water source. Fertilizer as well. And composting, as well as thinking about how with the wildlife habitat, our area threes, our backyards can kind of link up corridors and restore them because those are areas of our yard that we don't go to so often, which can be as large an area like Four Springs Lake Preserve, which is 50 acres. So that has, where the house is, it's area one, where the trails are is in area two, and then most of it is in area three with where people aren't going. So, but it can be um, a small lot too. And if you think about backyards going together, then if we think about area three is not doing much with it or putting brush piles there and having maybe a hedgerow instead of a fence, then we are restoring corridors. Okay, it's easy to certify. You certify with the National Wildlife Federation. You can get this application on our website. And this is it's the same, it's the application for National Wildlife Federation, but we've added our address so that I can count. So that's why I can tell you today that we have 1,057 backyard wildlife habitats. You can also go online and certify there with the National Wildlife Federation, nwf.org. And if you live on Camano, I can count your numbers because I can see what our list is from them because they keep track. But we've had people send the applications to us so that we can count and we can also bird dog the application through because once in a while the National Wildlife Federation kind of misplaces them for a while and things slow down. So I can kind of make sure everything goes through. Once you've certified, you can put up a sign. So we have our own special sign on Camano, and it has our Toei and the art that Bev Paulson did for us when we first started the project in 2002. And so that's kind of special for Camano. They're $15 if you are certified and or want to certify. I'll be at the Snow Goose Festival on Saturday, and I'll have signs there. And so if you're certified, you just need to have your number so I know that you're certified. And if you haven't certified, you can certify and get a sign at the same time. Also, if you can get one from the National Wildlife Federation, and they're kind of embracing their ranger Rick to get people excited about backyard wildlife habitats. Note that these signs are nice to have up. One, we get advertising because I get calls all the time that says, oh, you know what? I have a certified wildlife habitat. I can do whatever, and I deserve a sign. I said, oh, well, I can tell you how to get one. And so that kind of promotes the idea. It also is nice because backyard wildlife habitats tend to be a little messier. Like take, for instance, the ocean spray. Ocean spray comes out in June and it is beautiful with teeny tiny little flowers. I think it's the most gorgeous little, it can be a taller shrub that we have. And when it dries up at the end of June, July, it has these little dried on flowers that hang kind of like, they look like dried up lilacs on a lilac bush. Anyway, some people think they're kind of messy looking. The chickadees, however, love them. So if you have a sign up, it says you're doing whatever for a purpose. It makes everything purposeful. Yard art helps too. Okay, so you can see on the map that, and this map has only 700 dots, and we have 300 more, or almost 300, we have 357 more. So anyway, but you can see it goes all throughout the island and with the idea that we're reestablishing corridors. And Camano was the 10th habitat in the nation to certify. There are now 159 certified wildlife habitats in the country, and we were the second in the state. There are now 18, and you can see Tukwila was the first. That's kind of our spur to do it, because if Tukwila could be a community wildlife habitat, we figured we could be one on Camano as well. If you're interested in becoming more involved and learning more about wildlife habitats, the National Wildlife Federation is having habitat stewards training in March. And so this is available to sign up for. It's Wednesdays in March. and you can go to, well, you can contact Guinevere at the National Wildlife Federation Regional Office in Seattle at that email address. And you can also apply at that website. So if you take a screenshot, you'll get all that information. Or you can contact us at Camano Wildlife Habitat at gmail.com. No, did I get that address right, Roxy? Yeah. Anyway, so that's kind of nice. $20 is a cheap price for some great training, and they'll offer it's via Zoom, and they'll offer some field trips as well. We did our last habitat steward training right before COVID, and we don't know when we'll be doing one specific for Camano. So this is a good opportunity to get some more information about wildlife landscaping.
I just added it to the chat and it's on our website.
Great, thanks, Roxy.
Mhm.
I've got a website too. Roxy does a fabulous job with our website. So if you haven't perused that, can go and look at all our old programs and various things, and it's really a gem. Anyway, so you can get more information at our website. It also has a plant list for native plants in with the layers idea, and with hot, shady, or sunny, wide or narrow areas. So it's got some good information. NationalWildlifeFederation.org, NFW.org, has great information as well. And they've got some native plant tools that are great to use as well. References, you can check out Russell Link's book, Living with Wildlife or Landscaping for Wildlife. And those are specific Pacific Northwest. Russell Link lives on Whidbey, so he knows the area well. And then Attracting Birds is the National Wildlife Federation's book about backyard wildlife habitats. And with that, so we're pretty pleased with our project, but we still would like to get more wildlife habitats. So if you haven't certified, please consider doing so. And if you have, well, you've got friends, because our goal is to, get people to think about what they can do in the yards rather than worry about the loss of habitat on the island. Okay, with that, I am going to, I've lost my Zoom page. Anyway, if I stop sharing, that will do it. Sorry. Yeah, there you guys are. Okay. Now I want to, I want to tell you about a few things before I introduce Shona. So I need to tell you, I thought it was organized, but I'm not. Okay, I told you about the Habitat Stewards training coming up. That's March 6th, so you can find out information in the chat or our website. Then our next two programs are going to be in person rather than Zoom. We're not sure about May, which way he wants to go yet. But Plants for Pollinators is the March program, March 20th at the formerly Blue Building, now Sage by CASA. And April 17th is the Pollinators Diversity workshop by Bob Gillespie, and he's a former etymology professor. And so this weekend there's the Snow Goose Festival, and there's a number of speakers that will be there. There's different tours, and then there's tables, so you can find out a lot of information about birds. I will be there, and Friends of Camano Parks, our sponsor group, will be there. So stop by and say hello. And then there's also on Sunday at 2 o'clock a program about pollinators that Bob is doing at the Paws and Wings place, the new animal store on the island where you can get bird seed and cat food and various things. So that will be at 2 o'clock at her spot. So that is the scoop on what I can tell you. Then I've got lots to tell you about Shona. So we are very lucky about Zoom, because that's how we get Shona to come and do programs for us. So last year she did one on,
Owls.
Owls, yeah, sorry. And the year before, it was about babies and how the babies coming out during the spring season and how we can protect them. And so this year, it's about woodpeckers. But let me tell you about her. She's from Scotland, and she has a degree in biology and environmental science from the University of Stirling. She worked for the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, and she also was a countryside ranger for several years. She was 2 years she was at the Marine Station in Sweden. Then she moved to San Juan Island in 1990. Started out as a volunteer for Wolf Hollow, and later became, after that, she became the education coordinator. And well, she's retiring at the end of March, so she's been there a long time. I know I've seen her various times at tabling, as well as we took a tour of the facilities about the same time we started the Backyard Wildlife Project. And so she does lots of programs, is at the state parks, very knowledgeable. And so we're so lucky that we have Zoom so that Shona can tell us all about woodpeckers. So Shona Aitken, she's the education coordinator at the Wolf Hollow Rehabilitation Center. So welcome, Shona.
Thank you very much. I'll just share screen here. There we go. So there we are. You can see that our topic for this evening is knock on wood, woodpeckers at work. So I'm sure living on Camano or wherever else you're living, you've seen or heard all kinds of different woodpeckers. And sometimes it's difficult to know. You hear them and you try to track them through the woodland and you're not sure which woodpeckers are around. So that's what I'd like to talk about this evening, is the different types of woodpeckers that you're going to see. So yeah, just giving an idea of the range of different woodpeckers that we have in the area, how to tell them apart, what signs they leave behind, what noises, sounds they make, so that you might find out more about the woodpeckers that live around you. So, but first I'd like to talk a little bit about woodpeckers in general, because they're amazingly well adapted for what they do. As I'm sure you know, most woodpeckers, you see them clinging to the trunks or branches of trees. They're gleaning insects off the surface, or they're pulling off bits of bark, or they're pecking holes in the wood to extract insects to eat, insects and insect larvae, picking up little spiders, all these kinds of things. So in many different ways, they're adapted to make this lifestyle much more effective. Their feet, their tails, their skulls, their tongues are all very well adapted for that. So let's take a look. So starting off with the feet, this is actually the foot of a pileated woodpecker. And a couple of things you'll notice about it is that it's, sorry, we're moving a little closer so maybe you can hear me better. Notice that it's got very long curved claws that help it to cling onto the bark, onto the trunk of a tree, or onto the branches. And also that it has 2 toes forward and 2 toes back. Now, most birds, when you see them perched or hopping around, have 3 toes forward and 1 toe back, so they can grab onto a branch and perch there. But there are a few kinds of birds, woodpeckers being one of them, that can move one of these digits round and have 2 forward and 2 back. The term for it is a great word. It's zygodactylous. So woodpeckers, owls, and several other different types of birds can do that. And for woodpeckers, I presume that it just gives them a nice stable base when they're hanging on to the trunk of a tree. So their feet are well adapted. and so are their tails. So most birds, their tails are relatively stiff. They use them as a rudder when they're flying. They can flare them out when they're landing. They can move them around. But woodpeckers have extra stiff tails to prop them up when they are on the trunk of a tree. That prop enables them to lean back so that they can peck at the bark, peck at the wood, and have a stable base with their feet and tail, giving them a 3-point prop. And when it comes to their skulls, the question always is, why don't they bash their brains out when they're pecking hard at the wood? We can hear them pecking and banging on the wood, hammering on the wood for hours on end. So how come they don't damage themselves? Well, there's all kinds of different adaptations to prevent that happening. So there's a lot of spongy bone in their brains. It's kind of like wearing a football helmet or a horse riding helmet to support them and prevent their brain being damaged by the shock of the blows when they are hammering. And unlike other animals, including ourselves, that have a lot of fluid around their brain, woodpeckers don't have much of that. They don't have much fluid and space around their brain so that things are sloshing around and they could damage themselves. And they also have incredibly strong, sharp beaks that can very effectively hammer at the wood and make these holes pretty effectively. So all of that helps them not to damage their brains when they're doing what woodpeckers do and digging all these holes into the wood and the bark. Now, of course, once they've made that hole, they need to stick their tongue in there to get to these insects or insect larvae that are deep within the wood or under the bark. And woodpecker tongues are amazing things. They're kind of weird. And the first time you see one in an animal coming into the Wildlife Rehab Center, you think there's something far wrong with it because its tongue is extended way beyond its beak. But their tongues are actually two separate bones. They're anchored in the nostrils. They go up and over the top of the skull, round underneath, come in through the bottom jaw, and then they join to provide a really muscular tongue that can be extended in some woodpeckers way beyond their beak. And in addition to that, the tips of the tongue can be different in different woodpeckers depending on what they eat. So little sapsuckers can have a brushy tip on the end of the beak to lap up sap, while flickers have a long, slender tongue to go deep inside anthills. And some woodpeckers have barbs on their tongue to be able to skewer things like big, juicy beetle grubs. And to help with that whole process, their saliva is thick and sticky and kind of glue-like sometimes, so that can help them lap up ants or other insects. So all of these adaptations help them to do their job better. And we talked about them not bashing their brains out. So the combination of their tail propping them up can disperse the energy. They've got strong neck and shoulder muscles, the tongue that's wrapped around their skull. Scientists have worked out that together, all of these features can absorb 99.7% of the shock from hammering on wood. So I don't know how they worked that out. I'm not sure exactly how they measured that, but they decided that woodpeckers are incredibly effective at not bashing their brains out when they're hammering on wood. So which woodpeckers are we seeing in our area? Well, I'm going to talk about the ones that I know that we are found in Western Washington. There are often an occasional one that turns up that's outside of the 5 that I'm going to talk about. And most of my experience is from the San Juan Islands, but I think most of the woodpeckers that we have here are ones that you also have on Camano. Starting smallest, the downy woodpecker. It's about the size of a big sparrow, and books usually describe it as black and white, but in the West, the white is more of a dingy, creamy gray color. And so they're more sort of cream and black rather than white and black. The males have a little bit of red on the back of the head, which the females don't have. And you'll notice that their beak is relatively short. And this little woodpecker is really demonstrating all the things we just talked about, the adaptations. It's clinging to the bark with its strong toes and sharp claws. You can see its tail is propping it up so that it can lean back and be able to peck hard at the wood. So that's the smallest, downy. It's found in a whole bunch of different types of woodland and actually likes our backyards and gardens, parks, eats a range of things, and it does a lot of its foraging by gleaning insects, spiders, some seeds and berries off the surface of branches. And it's so small that it can go right out onto the smallest branches and twigs where other woodpeckers can't reach. And some of the changes that we've seen in the forests in Western Washington have actually benefited downy woodpeckers because they are able to make their living in a wide range of different woodland. So suburban gardens with ornamental trees and parks with a range of broadleaf trees. Downy woodpeckers can deal with all of that and find food in all of these places. If we go a little bit bigger, about a third as big again, is a very similar woodpecker, hairy woodpecker. And again, described as black and white, but the Western ones often have a more creamy colored underside, creamier grayish rather than pure white. Again, the males have red on the back of the head, but notice that their beak is much longer than the downy woodpecker. And they are more likely to be picking at the bark, flaking pieces off, trying to drill holes in the bark rather than just picking up things on the surface. They're bigger, so they're more likely to be on main branches and on the trunks of trees rather than on just little twigs, the way the downy woodpeckers are. And they are found throughout the country, but in many places, when you take conifers out and replace them with deciduous trees, these hairy woodpeckers don't do as well. They're much more at home in mature conifer forests, especially here in Washington. So their numbers have gone down when these changes in forest type, whereas the downy woodpeckers have probably gone up. Now, it can be difficult to tell the difference between a downy and a hairy woodpecker. So that's why I have these two side by side. Look very similar colors. But if you look at the beak, you'll notice if you look at the length of the beak compared to the width of the head, from the back of the head to the base of the beak, and then the base of the beak to the tip of the beak. So downies have short beaks that's considerably shorter than the width of their head, while hairy woodpeckers, their beak is pretty long, almost the same length as the width of their head. So sometimes you don't get a really good look, and you very rarely get a downy and hairy woodpecker side by side to compare them. But if you look at that silhouette and the length of the beak, that can often help you decide which of these birds you're seeing. A little bit larger again, and the most commonly seen woodpecker that we have around here is the northern flicker. It's a bit different from many of the woodpeckers because it's not black and white. It is a brown woodpecker, has kind of streaks on the back, dots on its underside, a black crescent on its chest. And they're all northern flickers, but we mainly see the red-shafted version in the western part of the state. They have bright orange under the tail and bright orange under the wing feathers. The males have that beautiful red mustache that you can see there. So they're the most commonly seen one here. But if you go just a little bit further east, there are yellow-shafted flickers. Again, they're northern flickers, but just different colors. You can see that bright yellow under the tail, and they have bright yellow under the wings. The males have a black mustache instead of a red mustache, and they often have that red crescent on the back of the head. So that sounds nice and simple. Bright yellow, it's a yellow-shafted. Bright orangey red, it's a red-shafted. But not as always as simple. There are intergrades between the two. So this is a young flicker that we raised at Wolf Hollow. He's just getting his red mustache, so we can tell it's a male. He's got a little bit of red on top of the head, which is typical of young woodpeckers. You can also see a little bit of a red crescent on the back of the head. So apparently some red-shafted flickers have that too. But sometimes you'll find flickers that have very pale orange, almost yellow, and then they have a red mustache. So some of these characteristics can be mixed and matched just to make it confusing, so you're not sure which type of flicker it is that you're looking at. Personally, I don't care. I think of them all as northern flickers, and that's good enough for me. But expert ornithologists can tell you all the intergrades between the two. Flickers are the most commonly seen woodpecker in our area because they can adapt to a wide range of habitats. They don't really like thick forest. They like more open woodland with open areas because they spend a lot of their time foraging on the ground. They can do the typical woodpecker thing on trees, but they also like to forage on the ground and pull ant hills apart to get to the juicy grubs inside. So very different from some of the other woodpeckers. And this photo shows youngsters that we raised at Wolf Hollow after someone cut a tree down during nesting season, and these youngsters were inside the cavity in the tree, and we got them when they were tiny youngsters, and now they're all clambering around on the wood there and almost ready to fly. So going up in size again, the biggest woodpecker, actually the largest in the United States now that the ivory-billed woodpecker has become extinct, the pileated very striking. It's the one that has the crazy woody woodpecker kind of laugh. Beautiful big black bird, about the size of a crow. Bright red crest. The male has a red mustache. And you always know when they're around. There's nothing subtle about a pileated woodpecker. Their crazy laugh, when they're drumming on trees, the sound carries for miles. So where are they found? Well, pileateds were found all over the US, but their numbers declined drastically in many areas because they need big trees. They need large trees to roost, to make cavities to roost in and nest in. And they need large downed logs for all the beetle larvae that they raise their youngsters on. So as big trees were removed, the numbers of pileated woodpeckers were reduced. They're big birds, so they spend most of their time on the main trunks and heavy branches of large trees. And this is actually a snag in my backyard. And this female pileated woodpecker is taking big chunks out of it, gradually making her way down to where all the beetle larvae are. Then, and as I say, their numbers were reduced so much that they were being considered for listing on the endangered species list at one point. So there's also another woodpecker that maybe not seen as much as the others that we've mentioned, the red-breasted sapsucker. A little bit smaller than a robin, about the same size as a hairy woodpecker, but it looks like somebody turned it upside down and dipped its head and shoulders in bright red paint. It's got a kind of creamy yellow belly, but the most obvious feature is that bright red head and chest and neck. They're found in a range of different habitats, but often along the edges of rivers or lakes. This photograph was actually taken up along the Baker River in the Cascades. And unlike other woodpeckers, when they're making holes in trees, they're making lines of small holes in live trees, trying to get the sap to ooze out so they can eat the sap, which is very high calorie, the insects that are drawn to the sap, and also some fruit and various other things. So yeah, little tiny holes in rows tell you that red-breasted sapsucker was there. And again, unlike the other woodpeckers, they're only found in a little narrow west coast strip. There are other types of sapsuckers in other parts of the country, but the red-breasted sapsucker is only found down the western side of the country and only in Western Washington. Get to the Cascades, there's another sapsucker, the red-naped sapsucker, that's found in that area, and apparently the little red-breasted sapsuckers interbreed with these, so you have some hybrids along in the Cascade Mountain area. So that beautiful little bird, the red-breasted sapsucker. So these are the 5 that I know of that are commonly seen or reasonably commonly seen in Western Washington. But very often you don't actually see the bird. You see signs that have been there, you hear them, you're trying to track them through the forest to see what had made the sound. So let's have a look at some of the signs that they leave behind that give you clues as to which type of woodpecker might be around. If you come across little tiny holes like this where the bark has been chipped off and small holes have been drilled, probably a hairy woodpecker was responsible for that. Relatively small and not terribly deep. across something like this, huge holes, that's my hand, so that gives you an idea of the size of the hole. Deep excavations in through the bark and into the inside of the tree, almost certainly pileated woodpeckers. They're the biggest with the biggest, heaviest beaks, so that they can do all this excavation and get deep inside the tree. As well as feeding, they will be doing this to create holes to roost in and also to nest in. And then when there are fallen trunks or stumps, and there's a ton of wood chips around, they've been taken to pieces. Again, a range of woodpeckers might have part in this, but the pileated are those that take things apart and reduce a trunk or a stump to a pile of wood chips in just a few months. And these are the little holes, lines of holes that sapsuckers make. So this is a fallen tree, as you can see, but sapsuckers are going for healthy, live trees because they want to have that sap ooze out so that they can eat it and also eat the insects that are attracted to the sugary sap. So you can see some trees that have line after line after line of these tiny holes, and the sapsuckers visit different trees to pick at the sap, keep it all running, and have food from various sources in their area. If you come across an anthill that has a big dent in it, and the ants are scurrying around trying to repair the damage, it's probably northern flickers. This is one of their specialties, to go and tear holes in the anthills, and then they can get their long, thin tongue deep into the chambers underneath to get ants, but also the larvae that are in the chambers in there. So they can do a lot of damage to a big anthill, and it takes the ants a while to repair the damage and make it all weatherproof again. So when it comes to sounds, like most birds, woodpeckers can make a range of sounds, make a range of calls to communicate with each other. They can be alarm calls or just various communication calls. They can make little light taps when they are prospecting. They tap along the bark on a tree, trying to find an area where there might be a little hollow sound, where there might be a big juicy beetle grub underneath the bark. And then they will start hammering to take the bark off and get down into the wood. So you have the light little exploratory taps and then a harder hammering to take the wood out and make holes. Oops, beg your pardon. And then there's drumming. And drumming is nothing to do with food. It's all about advertising. They do the drumming to advertise that they're in an area, to advertise for a mate, to say, I'm here, I have a good area. Are there any other woodpeckers out there? You want to join me? So the drumming is advertising and usually done in the early part of the breeding season in the spring. So let's listen to some of the sounds that some of these woodpeckers make. Some of them are quite similar, so might not be able to tell the difference always, but it's nice to know what they sound like. So starting with the smallest, the little downy woodpecker. Here's the call. Well, good tap. Okay, and then we'll see if you can hear the difference between that and the hairy woodpecker.
And you can turn your volume down just a little bit. There we go. Yes, we heard that.
And then drumming. And then the flicker. Now, this is one that you've probably heard more than any of the others. And then sometimes a much more rapid call. Crazy sounds. So I don't know if you'll be able to tell much difference between the drumming sounds, but some of the larger woodpecker drumming is a deeper sound. And if we move on to the pileated, maybe you can hear the differences. And they have a range of different calls, of course. So there's and then the one that you often hear echoing through the forest. And then when they're drumming or tapping or drumming, it sounds much deeper than some of the other woodpeckers, the bigger birds with heavier beaks. And they tend to be working on larger trunks of trees too. So that was the largest one. And then our little sapsucker makes totally different sounds. It doesn't do much tapping on trees, just making these little holes compared to the big holes that some of these other woodpeckers are making. But it does drum. So I don't know if you could tell the difference between these, but it's quite fun just trying to work out which woodpecker you're listening to. So these are the 5 woodpeckers that I know of that we often see in the area. That's just a few little pieces of information about these woodpeckers, but there's a number of different places where you can get lots more information. Birds Connect Seattle used to be Seattle Audubon Society. There's BirdWeb, which has some great information about all kinds of birds in Washington State. Obviously, National Audubon Society, Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And if you want sounds, the Macaulay Library is the very best place to get all kinds of sounds of woodpeckers. So lots of places for you to get more information. But before we go, I'd just like to talk about how important woodpeckers are in the forest, in the woodland ecosystem. Because of all the things they do, and breaking down wood and making holes in trees, they're a really essential part of a forest ecosystem. So when they're pulling apart downed logs like this, or making holes in old dead trees, they're breaking down the wood and opening it up so that insects and fungi and all kinds of other things can get in there to break the wood down faster. So it's going into the soil, and then the nutrients are benefiting the rest of the forest. They're also pretty good at all these insects they're taking out. You know, pileated's taking lots and lots of carpenter ants. So they can be, and a lot wood-boring beetles. So they can be really helpful in preventing an outbreak of disease causing beetles or ants, etc. So that woodpeckers can have that wonderful balancing effect when there's these detrimental insects start to invade. And the cavities that they make in the trees for roosting or for nesting, often woodpeckers don't use the same cavity for nesting the following year. They go and make a new one. So then all kinds of other animals can use these cavities to make their den or their nest. So it could be little northern flying squirrels, purple martins. If the tree is near water, purple martins might decide to make their nest inside an old woodpecker nest cavity. And even things like little saw-whet owls or this western screech owl can end up using woodpecker cavities for their nests. So they're really important in providing all these holes. None of these animals could make these holes on their own. So they're using what a woodpecker has already created. And the sapsucker holes, the little wells that they make where the sap oozes out, there's a lot of different other animals that can benefit from these, either drinking the sap or eating the little insects that come to the sap. And one of these is the Anna's hummingbird. And people have seen hummingbirds following sapsuckers around to take advantage of these little wells of sap that they've created, especially in the fall when there's some of the other food is not available. So all these different things that woodpeckers do that are really useful for the forest. So what can we do for them? Well, the main things, and I'm obviously talking to a wildlife habitat group, so a lot of the things that we can do is to leave large native trees. Bigger woodpeckers like pileatids need these larger trees. And dead and dying trees. That's where a lot of the food is that many of the woodpeckers are eating, the beetle larvae and carpenter ants and that type of thing. There's this idea that woodpeckers kill trees, but that's very rarely the case. Occasionally sapsuckers may drill so many holes that they can damage a tree, but in general, woodpeckers are going after trees. If they're making large holes, they're going after trees that are already dead or dying, because that's where all the beetle larvae and ants, etc., are, and they're going there to get the food. So leaving these dead and large, standing dead and dying trees, and the stumps and decaying logs on the forest floor, again, are great sources of food for woodpeckers. And at the rehab center at Wolf Hollow, when we get woodpeckers, a number of different things have caused the problem for them. We have people taking down trees during nesting season and then discovering that there are some young woodpeckers inside a cavity in that tree. So that's how we've often got some young flickers for care. And then little woodpeckers flying into windows. And that's a problem for a whole range of birds, but that's often why we get little downy or hairy woodpeckers. So there's a number of different things that we can do to help woodpeckers. And in turn, they're going to help our forests be healthy and also very diverse, with breaking down all that, helping break down all that wood and helping to feed the forest. So I'm going to stop there, and hopefully you've learned a bit about the different woodpeckers that you might find in your area, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
So feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question verbally, or you can type it in the chat. That was fun, Shona. How many woodpeckers do you typically get a year?
You know, it varies widely. We'll say somewhere about maybe 15, 20 woodpeckers, but then we can get a batch of six young flickers, and that changes the number really quickly. So
Sure.
it varies.
So what percentage of your patients do they make up? Or is that like a small percentage, like 10%, or?
It's a small number. At the moment, we're treating about 400 to 500, well, about 400 animals a year. And so if we're getting, 10, 15 woodpeckers.
I live on the top of Cross Island Road. We have all 5 of those woodpeckers that you showed. I really appreciate your lesson today. One of the things that we experience, and I don't know if it's the downy or the hairy, but we have a lot of sapsuckers too. Our trees are just riddled with little holes, but sometimes they drum on the sheet metal on our house, on the downspouts, or maybe it's the gutters. I don't know which. What do they just like the sound of that? I mean, it surprised me at first when I heard that, but now I'm used to hearing it every so often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a number of woodpeckers that have discovered that metal chimneys and downspouts are just wonderful, because the sound travels even further than if you do your drumming on a tree. And on Orcas Island a few years ago, Lopez Island a few years ago, there was a pileated woodpecker that was drumming on power posts. So the power company decided that that wasn't a good idea. This big woodpecker was damaging the posts. So they put metal flashing around the posts to prevent that happening. And the pileated woodpecker went, yay, the sound travels much further now. That was great. Thank you.
There's a question in the chat from Karen. Do they hear insects in the trees when they are deciding where to delve into the wood on a tree?
Yeah, they may be, and I'm not entirely sure. I think they can hear some of the little sounds of maybe bigger beetle larvae under the bark, but also when they're tapping initially, they're kind of listening for more hollow spots where there might be a cavity, a little channel with a beetle larvae or something in there. So I don't know for sure, but I think it's probably a combination of them listening, but also the tap, 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 trying to find a hollow spot that might have something juicy in it for eating.
Any more questions?
I see Lucius has his hand raised. Maybe that's not a question. Oh, ask to unmute.
That's better. I was having difficulty unmuting myself.
Okay.
I had a question and it was answered in the same respect. Is that whether or not the woodpeckers would ever do anything to a building? Because we've been in a home here for just about 6 months and have heard some tapping on a metal roof for possibly, the side of the building. But that you answered that question, and then I was starting to try to type a question into the chat, is if they have much scent, if there is anything that I could ever be worried about if I heard a woodpecker tapping on my house, like there could be some carpenter ants or termites or something that they might be interested in that would be the reason why they'd be tapping on the building.
Yeah, and that's often the case. Woodpeckers can do damage to buildings. A number of people complain about flickers or other woodpeckers that are causing damage to their siding. And often that is because they can sense that there's something in. If they do it once, they're maybe just trying it out to see. But if they keep coming back again and again, it tends to suggest that you maybe do have a problem with termites or carpenter ants or something, because they wouldn't be coming back again and again unless they were getting something, or they had a good idea that there was something juicy underneath the siding there. So it could be an indication that it's worth getting things checked out if they come back again and again.
I've only heard them twice in the last month, but I thought, was it? And
Yeah.
their scent, you said their scent is good enough, though, that if they were coming back, would they likely be able to scent something that would be on the wooden siding or behind the wooden siding?
Yeah, I think they are maybe listening for movement, but also tapping and trying to feel, but
Yeah.
being aware that there was a little cavity under there where the boring beetle might have gone, or that kind of thing. So I don't know exactly how it works with woodpeckers, but I know that they do that kind of try out, and then they focus on a spot where they think there's something good, and then they will make the hole, put their tongue in and get whatever's in there.
Well, I didn't see any damage when I got up on the roof the other day to double check, but I do see some beautiful woodpeckers at the parks here that we're surrounded by.
Nice.
Thank you, though. Appreciate your talk today.
Thank you.
Becky has a question about taste. Do they have a sense of taste?
Now that's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that one. Don't know if anybody else who's here knows about that, but I'm not sure. I wonder what ants taste like, or beetle larvae taste like. Yeah, it's something I'd have to look up. I'm not sure.
Then Roxy put a link to the Living with Wildlife in the Pacific Northwest, and that has different things about the various woodpeckers in that book.
Yeah.
She also has a link to the habitat surgery, but I put a link in for Wolf Hollow, and I just wanted to make a plea, because Wolf Hollow, the rehabbers there at Wolf Hollow, and Shona as an educator in how we should treat our forests and whatnot, and our critters, is they're my heroes, because with all the habitat loss, it's like, oh, when the trees cut down, and then there's these little nestlings that have no place to go, we can call Wolf Hollow or Sarve for us is closer, but the rehab places are so important for helping the critters, for whether they're displaced or injured. So if you want to donate, it would, and this is my plea, not Shona's, but I put the information there, the website as well as the address, because they really do help with all the injured and displaced wildlife that happens. I know that one time there was a seal on the beach, and Wolf Hollow is one of, and Paws are the only two that take care of the seals and seal pups, and an airplane came to get the little seal pup.
Wow.
So anyway, so
Yeah,
that's
there's actually another group now called SR3, and they are specialist marine mammal place. So harbor seal pups will probably go to SR3, but it's great. Yeah, just so people know that they're aware. But we as rehabbers can't go out and assess seal pups on the shore and make the decision. There are marine mammal stranding networks that do that, but then the rehab centers provide the care once that part's been done.
Thank
So
you so
The Living with Wildlife book in the Pacific Northwest is in our local library. So if you have some issue with raccoons or deer or whatever, it helps you. It talks about ways to live in harmony with the animals. You know, sometimes it's a fence, sometimes it's removing, it's whatever it is that they're after. But it has some good suggestions.
We
Also,
all,
information is on their Fish and Wildlife website, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife
Well,
website.
it used to be. I was just Googling and I couldn't find it. They've been changing their website around. So they do
Okay.
have a bunch of stuff on their website. So I would try that because maybe I just didn't find it right away because
I
it
haven't
used to
looked in
be
a
a
while.
lot on it.
yeah, there's also actually a section on the Wolf Hollow website
Oh,
too,
excellent.
about living with wildlife in various ways. So there's a number of different places to get information if you're having some kind of issue with a wild critter, like having a woodpecker drumming on your metal chimney or that kind of thing. There are a number of places to get good information.
And a lot of the issues are or nuisances are caused by us. So it's
Yeah.
it's putting shield covering up the holes after baby season.
Right.
And doing things to prevent them there being a nuisance.
That's right. We call it preventive maintenance. You know, look at ahead of time, look at your house, look at underneath the house, look at vents, etc., and think, what kind of critter might want to get in there, and doing things to prevent it happening rather than trying to deal with it afterwards when it's much more difficult.
And doing it before baby season or waiting it out if you can, if it is baby season.
Yes.
An interesting program that we've got is Shona's talk on baby season, since that's coming up, and that's in the recordings on our website.
Great. Anything else? Well, thank you very much. This has been really fun.
Thank you.
Much appreciated.
And thank you all for joining us. We have a really good group tonight. Thank you all for the help with the sounds. That was wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you. It was delightful.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.